Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Titi. Thank you for taking time out to join us today at Crusader Sterling Pensions for our webinar, where we will be taking on the topic, Surviving the Times, Navigating Nigeria's Macroeconomic Landscape. For those who were with us the last time, we promised that it would be the first of many webinars to come. And true to our promise, as Crusader Sterling Pensions is known for, we are back. Yes, we are back with another impactful session. Today, we will be hearing from two expert speakers, Dr. Yemi Khale of KPMG and our very own MD CEO, Mr. Rotimi Adebiyi. Now, we cannot deny that the last couple of years have been particularly challenging with the economic fallout of the pandemic, runaway inflation, and the general cost of living crisis most of the country faces. This has been further exacerbated by the recent removal of fuel subsidy and all its economic ramifications. We are, however, hopeful that at the end of this session, we would all be better informed about the situation we are all facing, and more importantly, come away with viable strategies for navigating through these times. We have a lot outlined for you today, and as mentioned earlier, we will be listening to two expert speakers. We also have two of our executive directors here with us. Now, we want this session to be as engaging as possible, so please feel free to drop all your questions and or comments in the chat box. The chat box is open. If you would also like a personal response to all your questions, please use the Google form that has been provided. I believe that link has been dropped in the chat box already. And just to let you know, we are also live on YouTube, so please join us there as well. Before we get into the session proper, I would like to invite the indefatigable FO, Mr. Femi Odukoya, the Executive Director of Operations, to give us a brief on Crusader Sterling Pensions. FO, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Titi, for that excellent introduction. Good morning to you, to everyone. On behalf of the board and management of CPL, I thank you all for finding time to join us today. As earlier mentioned by the moderator, this is the second in the webinar series planned for this year. You will agree with me that the topic is apt and exactly fits into our own vision of creating value for retirement. I'll just give you a brief on Crusader Sterling Pensions. CPL is a licensed pension fund administrator incorporated in the year 2004. Our shareholders are institutional investors, and we are a subsidiary of the Custodial Investment PLC, a well-diversified financial services group. Our mission statement is to be the preferred pension fund administrator with the highest contribution base, whilst delivering superior returns. We are fully capitalized in line with regulatory requirements, and our major strength is in our ability to generate superior returns on funds under our management. For example, our Fund 2 price closed at 7.6215 Naira as at 21st of August, 2023, meaning we had returned 662% from inception to our esteemed contributors, who joined us since 2004. CPL is stable. We have a good corporate governance culture, with offices spread across 36 states of the Federation, including the Capital Territory. So in summary, this session is intended to engage you and create some adaptive thoughts while generating fresh ideas to navigate the times. I dare say you are in the right place, so relax and enjoy this session. Thank you again for joining us. So Titi, back to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, FO, for that informative piece on how we continue to keep our promise to our esteemed contributors for them to retire to a life of value. Now to the business of the day. I will, of course, start with a brief profile of our two speakers. Mr. Rotimi Adebiyi is the MD CEO of Crusader Sterling Pensions Limited. He has in-depth knowledge of the financial services industry, having worked in various capacities within the industry for over 25 years. He served as the CEO for HIP Asset Management Company prior to joining Crusader Sterling Pensions. Dr. Yemi Khale has over 23 years deep experience gained from both private and public sectors in macroeconomic analysis, financial, economic, and investment research, fiscal and macroeconomic policy advisory. He served as the CEO of the National Bureau of Statistics and is currently a partner and chief economist at KPMG. Without further ado, we will go straight to the presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Yemi Khale.
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. A few seconds to share my my screen, my presentation. Okay, good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. First, to thank Crusader Pensions for inviting me to make this presentation. I have been given the task to speak on whether there is a macroeconomic recovery in sight, and I'm supposed to do this in 20 minutes. So I decided that I would just, since I only have 20 minutes, I guess I can just say no, there is no macroeconomic recovery in sight anytime soon, and be done with my presentation. But on a more serious note, just to summarize why I said that, in case I'm not able to go through all my slides, because I'll have to go through everything very quickly. And I say this because there's so many things happening at the same time. Since 2019, Nigeria has been going through a lot of challenges. And if you look at it, and these challenges cut across every area of the macroeconomy, whether it's fiscal, monetary, the real sector, the external sector, there are challenges everywhere. And there's got to the point where it's so difficult to decide which challenge to tackle first. When friends in government, outside government ask me, what do we tackle first? I said, which one is more important? I say everything is important. At this point, you just have to pick a system, pick a strategy, and then sequence it from that point. But to decide which is more important than the other, it becomes extremely difficult. And that is why I say that in the short to medium term, no, I don't see recovery happening. There are too many challenges, and many of those challenges will take a lot more time to fix. But to go through my presentation, I grouped it into three major parts. I'll look very briefly at the global macroeconomic environment. And the reason I'm doing that is a lot of the challenges that we are facing today is coming out of challenges that are occurring in the global macroeconomy. Then I'll look at very briefly some of the issues in Nigeria that are more or less making me make that conclusion that our problems, there's no sign of recovery in the near term, before I offer some conclusions about where I think the country is headed. So let's start with the global macroeconomic environment. Now, and I'm going to move quite quickly because I want to try and complete this within 20 minutes. And if I skip anything or I don't dwell on any particular issue that the audience might want to hear, I guess they could ask me to elaborate during the Q&A session. So like I said, we're already familiar with what the challenges the global economy has been facing since 2019 with the 2019 COVID pandemic, and how as a result, the global economy went into a recession, supply chains were disrupted, unemployment surged globally, companies were struggling to find their raw materials, record high inflation, and just as the global economy was getting out of the challenges from COVID, they were hit again by further disruptions with the Russian-Ukraine war. And that took us back to another sequence of high inflation, slow growth, global supply chain disruptions, and so on. And it is against this backdrop that we came into 2023 with many of these challenges still facing us. So 2023 was more or less defined or shaped by the factors that you can see on your screen: high inflation, And related to that, and rising inflation, and related to that, countries all over the world trying to tackle this rising inflation by record hikes in interest rates. There was this general deglobalization, where every country is now looking inwards to sort its problems. That is still a challenge that is facing the global economy. Related to that, it led to a decline, and still happening, a decline in global foreign direct investment. Of course, the issues with the geopolitical tensions, first on the one hand between Ukraine and the US, and on the other hand between the other developed countries and Russia. Sorry, I mean Ukraine and Russia on the one hand, and on the other hand between the US and other developed countries and Russia. And you can see situations where now that you are seeing the issues where, for example, the BRICS nations are trying to take advantage of the global economic challenges to see if they can unseat the US. And in that bloc, there are actually two countries that actually have a direct face-off with the US. That's China and Brazil, and they attempt to see if they can wrestle control out of global control out of the US. And then, of course, more recently, we are aware of what's going on with in Niger, and the response, and we're waiting for the possible response by the Nigerian-led ECOWAS to see what they're going to do and the implications on further global supply chains. And of course, that tension, because different countries across the world are picking sides. There are some that are backing the Nigeri military leaders, others have chosen to back ECOWAS, and then it's going to be very interesting other development. Like I said, it's not just going to be a battle between Niger and ECOWAS. It's going to create a lot of more tension and create a lot more imbalance in the global economy. Finally, I'll highlight the fact that many analysts have been looking at slowing growth, and they are feeling that a lot of them have suggested that global economy might enter under recession, because they are seeing growth rates drop from as high as 5-6% to 2-3% is estimated this year. And they think that slowing down in growth is a sign of another recession coming up. I personally don't have that view, I said that because if you look at the growth rates that they are considering to be slowing down, they are pretty much around the same similar growth rates that many of these countries were growing before COVID. So to me, is many of these countries, the global economy returning back to some form of normalcy, as opposed to a sign that there's global recession. Another reason why I said that is that you see global unemployment rates are increasing. Again, that's not consistent with the slowdown in economic growth. And if the economy is growing slower than the previous quarters, and employment generation is improving, then clearly businesses that employ more people, and that they don't do that when the economy, when their businesses are slowing down. So again, I think that is just the global economy returning back to some form of normalcy following the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll give further reasons for this. Now, if you look at the JP Morgan Global PMI, you will see those two dips. Now, that dip below the purple line, that was the COVID-19 pandemic. Anything below that line shows that the economy is contracting. And that other dip around in 2022, mid-2022, that's the Russian-Ukraine war. But since then, you can see that global PMIs have grown above that 50 line. So that's a sign, and you can see for the first 3 quarters, actually, the global PMI actually was going higher every quarter. It's only in the last every month rather, it's only the last 2 months that it has slowed down, but it's still above 50. And you can see the chart beside it to show that supply chain disruptions have reduced, and that's what that line is. Anything with anything above that line is showing the extent of supply chain disruptions, but anything below shows that they are eased. So supply chain disruptions have eased significantly. There's something that I want to highlight here, though, is the slowing growth. If you look at the last 2 months, like I said, June and July in the PMI, you can see that it has started slowing down again, and that is creating a bit of concern. But again, like I said, if you compare that to the earlier part of the chart in July 2019, before COVID really hit, they are more or less around the same level. So I'm not sure if, I think it's too early to suggest that that dip is something that is a trend of global slowdown in growth. Another area I want to highlight here is also the inflation rate. Now, since 2023, inflation rates, global inflation has been going down. You can see in that chart, it was going down considerably across the entire country, most of the countries in the world. Actually, I think Nigeria is one of the only countries that continuously increased it, experienced continuous rise in inflation. But you can see that towards the end, you can see that the level of decrease in the inflation rate slowed down. And I remember mentioning a few months ago that I was a bit concerned that maybe that pattern of slowing down inflation was reducing and it might reverse. And the challenge with this was that many central banks across the world were believing that their interest rate hikes were finally beginning to work, because you can see that huge slope downwards. And where some were even talking about maybe slowing down the pace of interest rate hikes. However, with the slowdown in the level of decrease in inflation, it might cause them to reconsider slowing down the pace of interest rate hikes. Now we understand how the interest rate hikes affected Nigeria, particularly when it relates to foreign exchange. It made keeping the money in their countries a lot more beneficial than trying to take the risk of moving into high-risk environments like Nigeria. You can see what I mean here. You can see that for most of them, it either slowed down substantially, and for some countries, it actually reversed. Like in the US, inflation went back up. In India, it went up significantly. So that's actually quite worrying, because it means that these interest rate hikes are actually significantly affected countries like Nigeria in terms of capital inflow, in terms of some of the inputs that we get for our manufacturing are substantially threatened. I'm just going to skip this. I just selected some of the key countries in sub-Saharan Africa, basically just update us on what is really going on. But I'll emphasize Nigeria and Angola, mainly because Angola followed Nigeria with its subsidy removal. Now, there's a difference between the way they handle theirs and we handle theirs. Now, Angola's inflation rate is very close to its target, unlike all the other countries on this list, including Nigeria, its inflation target. The reason why Angola was able to keep its inflation rate low was during the period of the disruption, oil prices shot up significantly. So most oil-producing countries generated huge surpluses, apart from Nigeria. Nigeria could not do that because its own oil production actually got worse during that period. In fact, I have a theory that the reason why the oil production in Nigeria worsened during that period was just because the prices went up. It became more lucrative to steal more oil, and that's why it worsened. So Angola, on the other hand, built up huge buffers during that period, unlike Nigeria. And because of that, they were able to use those huge savings to keep their prices low. Nigeria could not do that. Instead, its own inflation rate shot up significantly. Now, the issue with subsidy is that while the subsidy decision, removal of subsidy was the right decision that was implemented by Nigeria and Angola, Angola was able to remove its subsidy when its inflation rates were low. Nigeria, on the other hand, had to do the same thing when its inflation rates were very high. And that is the difference. And so the timing of Nigeria's removal of subsidy, even though the right decision, was the wrong one. And it's working better in Angola because they were able to do this when inflation was already very low. So even when the subsidy was removed, the impact on overall economic activity was less. But in Nigeria, when you remove subsidy when prices were significantly high, you are just making things worse. You are squeezing consumer purchasing power, squeezing demand, squeezing business earnings, and in the process, slowing growth and making things a lot more difficult for Nigerians. And then you would force government to be forced rather to introduce palliatives to cushion the impact of that subsidy, rather than using those funds for different kinds of development projects, improving social and physical infrastructure. One last issue as far as global economy is concerned is the decision of OPEC to cut its global production and capping Nigeria's maximum output to about 1.6 million barrels a day. Now, the challenge with that is we're kind of close to that maximum already. So what happens is the possibility to generate more revenue from oil, because we have only a little bit of space left, is reduced. We can't really grow our oil output unless we want to renegotiate with OPEC, and do we have enough, do we have the strength to do that, or unless we want to pull out of OPEC completely. Now, OPEC has said that the reason they are doing this is to control prices, is to have a bit more control over prices, to cause prices to rise a little bit more. But I think there's, in addition to that, there's also some global politics being played, especially since joining Russia and China. I think Russia is particular. They're just trying to stick it to the US, create more problems for them, knowing the impact of inflation and in their politics. Despite cutting production, though, oil prices, rather than going up, as you can see in the charts, are actually trending downwards, which is not necessarily beneficial for Nigeria, because now we're not able to benefit from that increase in oil prices, because our price is actually going down, which suggests that OPEC might even cut production even further, and they might consider even reducing Nigeria's quota, because one of the reasons they get for reducing Nigeria's quota is the fact that we have not been able to meet the previous quota. We are currently not even meeting the previous quota, so we're very vulnerable to further reduction in our oil quota. Again, that affects our ability to generate FX, that affects the exchange rate, that affects our revenue, and so on. Coming to Nigeria directly, we have still been unable to achieve this huge economic potential that we all know about. Nigeria's economic potential is very well recognized, and that is why, despite all the challenges we have had over the years, you see that foreign investors, even when they leave Nigeria or don't want to come in, they're always watching what is going on. They want to see what's going on in the economy, because they understand that all we need to do is get our act together, and once we do that, Nigeria's there's huge prospects for the Nigerian economy. But currently, we have not been able to meet that huge potential. And I've summarized this into four main categories. One, obviously, is our over-reliance on oil since the 1970s. Of course, we have not really had a consistent pattern of stability, and the obvious and its obvious implication on having a proper long-term development path, like countries like China and Singapore and Cuba. We don't really have that. We always had disruptions, so we have to go in and out all the time. Of course, I call this unforced errors. What I mean by unforced errors is just inconsistent policies. There are things that we caused ourselves, mostly as a result of government policy, taking the wrong decisions, taking the wrong strategies, doing things that we really didn't have to do, but by doing them, we made things worse. I think that's one of the major reasons why we're in the situation we are in today. Of course, external shocks. But I think all these are all functions of the dysfunctional macroeconomic structure we operate. And by dysfunctional, I mean that while we define Nigeria as having an oil sector with 6, 7, 8%, contributing 6, 7, 8% of GDP, and a non-oil sector contributing the balance of 90+%, suggesting that our economy is well diversified. In reality, our economy is made up of an oil sector, yes, with 6, 7% GDP. But it's made up of a non-oil sector that has two components. A component accounting for 85% that is significantly dependent on oil, and a component that accounts for 38% that is not really significantly dependent on oil. That means that directly and indirectly, 62% of the economy is dependent on whatever happens in the oil sector. And that is why we have found it difficult to grow above that 3% over the last few years, because throughout the entire period, our oil sector has remained has been contracted throughout that period. There's a 92% correlation between the growth in the oil sector as well as overall growth. So because our oil sector has so many non-oil sector activities dependent on oil, whatever happens in the oil sector significantly affects whatever happens in Nigeria. That's what I call a dysfunction. The dysfunctional economic structure that we operate. And until we remove that dysfunction, it's going to be extremely difficult for us to have any sustainable level of growth in the Nigerian economy. Well, accordingly, we have moved from a period, and I'll explain why. We have moved to a period when we are growing by 6 to 7, 8, 7.7% on average. We have moved from a period of growing on average 6%, 7.7% in the last decade, in the last two periods, to a situation where in the last 8 years we grew by only 1.1%. And yes, part of it has to do with the external shock. Part of it has to do with the dysfunctional economic structure that I mentioned. But I think there are two additional problems. One has to do with, and I'm focusing on the one I mentioned, on first errors. For example, the redesign of the Naira redesign policy. That's one of the things I call it an unforced error. A decision is a policy, a decision that was taken that had significant impacts on the trajectory of the economy. And that's why, rather than growing at an estimated growth rate of 3.4% in Q1, we went down, we grew by 2.3%, to the point where even the agricultural sector contracted. So these are signs of, these are the kind of things I call unforced errors. Another unforced error is the way in the last 8 years, our strategy for growth changed. Now, previously in the period, at the time when we were growing 6-7%, the strategy was, the economy was growing as a result of, this is your GDP formula: consumption, investment, growth, net export. We're all familiar with this by the expenditure approach. Now, the consumption portion and the private investment function in particular is the largest portion of your GDP. And in the period when we are growing 6-7%, that growth was driven by growth in consumption. It was driven by growth in private investment, because private businesses had capital, they were expanding, consumers had a stronger purchasing power, they were spending, so the economy grew. Now, when in the last 8 years, the strategy changed. Instead, we moved to a system where government was actually driving the economy. Now you moved, and government was driving the economy by squeezing consumption expenditure, by squeezing private investment. So we took power away from consumption and private investment. That was the biggest share of our GDP, to boost government expenditure and government investment, which are actually the smallest part of our economy. And by doing that, it reduced the capacity of the economy to grow significantly. You can see that last box on the lower left. Household consumption that used to grow by 4.7% on average during that period reduced by about half to 2.84%, which in the last 8 years. Private investment that was growing by 4% on average between 2007 and 15 reduced to almost 1%, less than 0.26%. At the same time, government investment doubled, and government expenditure that was contracting at minus 4.16%, that period when we are growing very strongly, actually grew significantly to almost 5%. So the government strategy was to take money out of the hands of businesses, to take money out of the hands of consumers through taxes and tariff increases and things like that, to give government money to spend. And that's why we are not able to grow. And that's why we have found ourselves in this situation. Now, why I'm highlighting this, because it seems as if we are still adopting that same model today. And that's one of the reasons why I feel there's no recovery in sight. For example, the increase in subsidy, the removal of subsidy and the increase in prices, the impact on food, the impact on transport costs, and so on, is taking money away from consumers whose incomes have not grown significantly. It's increasing the cost of production of private businesses, including maybe the CBN's insistence on increasing NPR rates and increasing interest rate, increasing the cost of funding for businesses. So by doing that, even by government excessive borrowing, crowding out funds from the private sector, and the process putting pressure on the interest rate. So by doing all these things, you are making it difficult for private investment to grow, and you are squeezing consumption expenditure. And the same thing is still happening today, where government is trying to generate revenue by squeezing the money out of consumers and private businesses. And if that continues, it is going to be unlikely that we can get out of this challenge of very slow, fragile growth that we have been having for the last 8 years. Another problem is the fact that oil production has started. Initially, oil production following the president's, following the completion of the election, started improving. You can see it going from 0.99 million barrels to 1.18 to 1.24. But then in the last month, it slowed down to 1.08. We're not sure if this is just a temporary blip or it's just the usual thing that happens, that when a new government comes, everybody behaves themselves for a while, and then they go back to what they always do. So until we see the figures for August, we'll know. But that decline in July is very worrisome, because we know the oil receipts is one of the major ways we're able to get reserves to be able to meet FX demand and keep our exchange rate from depreciating further. So that's extremely worrying. That's one of the ones we have some form of control over. So that drop from 1.24 to 1.08 is actually a bit of concern. And that reason why I say we're not out of it. Things, all the indicators say they're moving in the wrong direction. After an initial excitement, after an initial boom, it seems that things have now settled and are beginning to worsen. I'm going to have to move much faster now. Another reason why I'm thinking that if you look at the PMI trend, you can see that in the last few months, that started going down again, that last graph. And that's a sign of further slowing growth. That big dip was as a result of the Naira redesign policy. So all the indicators are suggesting the economy is going to slow again, and that's as a result of a huge dent in consumer demand and a huge dent in businesses' income. Now, most businesses, particularly manufacturing, are struggling. You've seen all the results they are posting. They have two challenges. On the one hand, they are dealing with reduced demand, particularly those that produce non-essential commodities or products that have very high elasticity, price elasticity of demand. They are struggling to get consumers to buy their products. And on the other hand, they are facing higher cost of production. And they can't even pass on those costs to the consumers because they are, particularly for those firms that produce goods or services that are highly sensitive to price. So you will see PMI slowing down. That's an indication that we are going back again, growth is slowing down again. And that's it's a huge concern because the link between growth and government revenue and even employment is very, very strong. Looking at inflation, since 2019, inflation has kept shooting up. And following the subsidy removal, it went up even further. I want to say I'm a bit concerned about the last 2 months inflation numbers published by the NBS, and that's very difficult for me to say, considering I was there for 10 years. The figures that came out were a bit surprising, and I'm not very sure that they are very accurate. It's very difficult to say, but that's the truth. And I'll give you many reasons. You can see that it's too smooth. The change was too smooth, almost like nothing happened. You don't have an almost 200% increase in the price of PMS, and then you don't see an impact. Considering that transport is the biggest non-food item in consumer's basket. And even if you look at previous times that the PMS prices have changed, you see a bigger impact. So for example, in 2011, when the PMS price increased by just 3%, there was an over 200% increase in month-on-month inflation. And then in 2016, when it increased as well by 111%, there was a 75% increase in month-on-month inflation. But this time around, when it increased by over 200%, much higher than the previous times, it only went up by about 40-something%. So it looks like there's something wrong with the data that is coming out from those numbers. Maybe the inflation methodologies are outdated and needs to fix, but it's a bit surprising. And personally, I believe that it should be a lot higher. I personally believe that the inflation rate currently should be something closer to 26-27%. But nevertheless, the Bureau of Statistics is still the official source of data, and that's what we're going to use for our analysis. Anyway, inflation is going up. I expect inflation to continue in that trend for the rest of the year because even the full impact of the subsidy removal has not yet hit. To make it worse, prices of fuel is still going up. Then there are other policies that are coming in at the same time. The FX, the depreciation of FX and all these things, they're going to hit the economy. So up to the middle of next year, or at best, the end of first quarter, I expect the inflation rate to continue to climb. And then maybe by next year, March, April next year, at the earliest, these effects will kick in, and then the year-on-year rates will slow down. Nevertheless, inflation will still be very high. It will still be stronger, growing stronger than wages, growing stronger than income growth. So at the end of the day, it's still squeezing purchasing power, and it's making it so you have less to spend, you have less to save, and you have less to invest. So if your business is involved in any of those three, you are selling products. If you are a bank or an investment house, you are going to get less money from consumers to put in those accounts for savings or investments. And that's probably going to continue for the rest of this year and for most of next year at the earliest, assuming after that things are done properly. But for now, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Reaction to CBN's attempt to control inflation, it has not worked. Unlike many other countries, it has not worked. And I've always said that the reason why it has not worked is the logic between increasing interest rates to control inflation is because you are saying that there's excess cash in the system. People are just buying, likely things that they don't need. So by increasing interest rates, you're encouraging them to bring the money into the bank to get to end from those higher interest rates. Now that works in other countries because their financial inclusion rates are very high. So in Kenya, because of the M-Pesa, you have over 80% financial inclusion. In UK and all these other countries, you have 90%. But in Nigeria, you have 40%. So 60% of the economy is not in the financial system. So your financial system tools cannot work on 60% of the economy. So you keep increasing the interest rates, it can only affect 40% of the population of consumers. And even if you go to businesses where you have about 97% are micro, small, medium scale businesses, most of them completely don't have bank loans. So how does your increasing interest rate have an impact on preventing them from borrowing? It has very limited impact. And that is why the continuous insistence on increasing NPR rates, even though we have done this for 2 years, even though in my opinion, Nigeria has probably introduced the most restrictive monetary policy tools. We almost doubled NPR. We increased the cash reserve ratio from 15 to 30%. We even banned, at one point, banned the FX. Most of us could not use our cards to buy things abroad, or they gave us certain limit, and that should have controlled imported inflation. But nevertheless, despite all these things, inflation kept surging forward, and that's because the main cause of inflation then anyway was not money supply. It was more cost push factors. It was more security, distribution, transportation bottleneck. But instead, we are targeting money supply, which was not the challenge. If you look at the last graph, you see that the growth in money supply and the growth in GDP growth is almost the same. And there was a theory by Milton Friedman that says if you want to control inflation in terms of money supply and inflation, you have to make sure that your GDP growth is enough to absorb the increase in money supply. So if they are moving about the same pace, there's no excess. And if you look at that graph, for the most part, there's really no excess money supply. So money supply up to that point was not the issue. Now money supply might be the issue because it's growing significantly faster than GDP growth rate. But throughout the period when CPL was pushing up those rates, it wasn't having any impact on inflation because they were targeting money supply. That was not the problem when inflation is concerned. As expected, when the new government came in with the unification strategy, it of course led to a big devaluation of the Naira. And it was expected that by doing that, there would be huge inflow of FX in the country. For obvious reasons, that didn't happen, or that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's because a lot of potential inflow is still playing that wait and see with cautious optimism. And they're not really sure if those reforms will stick or will be reversed. In addition, the foreign portfolio investors are still not attracted enough by the interest rates to bring their money into the country to invest in our bonds or our capital market because the rates to attract them are not high enough to counter the risk of investing in Nigeria, and the possibility of increasing the rates to about 18, 19, 20% that would attract them closer to what the inflation rate is unlikely that Nigerian government can do that. Until they do that, they're going to look at, they're still going to keep looking, they're still going to keep watching and waiting for when it's a better time to bring the money in. To make it worse, the gap between the official and parallel market rates have started widening again. And that was one of the reasons why FX is not coming to the official channels. Home remittances would rather go to the parallel market because the rates are wide, much bigger. Export-oriented companies rather go to the parallel market or keep their money out because the rates are much higher. And now that the gap is widening again, it's even discouraging even more and more the strategy of more and more to go to the parallel market rather than go to the official market. To hold the foreign reserves as the official foreign reserves has dropped significantly since then. There are some people that have reported based on the CBS latest audited reports that the foreign reserves might even be a lot less than it's officially being reported, the net foreign reserve that is. The problem here is, and to stop that depreciation in the FX rate, the NNPC, as we all know, came up with this $3 billion loan from Afrexim they want to use to stabilize the exchange rate. Yes, it's not going to affect the debt position of Nigeria. It's actually just NNPC borrowing money, but it's going to affect the revenue position of Nigeria, because if NNPC is borrowing money, they have to repay that debt, and as they're repaying that debt, there's less revenue for government, especially when oil production is declining. They talk about bringing back the BDC. It's very strange, because if we are going back, they talk about reversing, even if temporary, the subsidy. Now, when you do these kind of things, we are trying to regain confidence. It just creates an atmosphere of lack of confidence, because all you are telling investors is we cannot stick to a policy. It was actually better not to have started until you were ready than to start and then reverse it, because anytime you come up with a policy later down the line, investors will now think, well, what if they reverse it? I'm not sure, and they'll wait, and it might not have that impact. So we are going to a situation where we are going to policy reversals again, and that kills credibility and it kills confidence. They talk about dollar bonds, allowing dollar bonds on the exchange, firms to borrow money. But then, like I always said, if firms borrow money in dollar bonds, they have to pay back in dollars. And if they're borrowing dollars, if we say, for example, Unilever issues a dollar bond to borrow, to earn dollars to buy its inputs. When it buys its inputs and produces its product, it sells in Naira. It now has to convert that Naira back to dollars to pay those bonds. I'm not sure if any of those firms are going to take that risk, because actually it could create a big challenge for them, especially with the FX rate not being not being consistent. The fiscal space is going to continue to be challenged. We understand why the deficit rose that high. We understand why public debt rose as significant as it did. It was basically a case of bad budgeting, where we overstated our revenues and overstated our expenditure, and the revenues didn't come in. Then we had to go to CPL for ways and means, and the debt just kept going higher, mainly because every year we kept increasing our revenue targets, even though we didn't meet the targets the previous year, and the gap kept widening and widening. And that's where we are right now. Nevertheless, I expect government to have to keep borrowing some more. There's already trying to widen the ways and means levels. There's talk about expanding the debt to GDP threshold from 40 to maybe 60% and so on. So I think government understands that they're going to have to increase revenue in the short term. The only way to really do that is to borrow more. And I think that's what we're going to see, and that's actually what we're already seeing happening. Yes, by depreciating the Naira, it has helped in terms of FAC allocations. But then we have to be very careful here, because if we allow all the money to come in as collected by FAC into the economy, we are also risking inflation. So yes, the depreciation of the Naira has helped states and federal government have more Naira to conduct their activities. But nevertheless, like I said, most of this is going to go into palliatives anyway. So the benefits in terms of social, physical infrastructure and so on, at least in the medium to long term, are not going to be there. Most of this extra revenue is going to be used for all these things. The reforms, the tax reforms that the government has introduced a committee to try and improve tax to GDP ratio, almost double it. And the process is going to be to harmonize taxes. But I feel that the first step will be to harmonize taxes. There is a possibility that once they're harmonized and fewer taxes are introduced, there might be a need to increase them in different areas. So I think there's probably going to be, I believe that the government has no choice but to borrow and to find a way of increasing taxes, the tax rate, because I don't expect any short to medium term huge benefits from just harmonizing taxes. There'll be benefits, yes, but not substantial enough in line with what the government is trying, in line with the revenues that the government actually needs to run its affairs and to develop the country. So in the short to medium term, when all this is happening, I don't expect any improvement in the macroeconomy. And that's again supporting my initial position that there's no light at the end of it already, not yet anyway, and probably not till probably the end of next year before we start seeing some positive side. Again, assuming everything that needs to be done is done. But for now, that is not happening. In conclusion, My prognosis for the next 12 to 18 months is one of rising inflation, substantially rising inflation. It's one of very slow, fragile growth, at least for the next 2 years. Again, if we get things right, it might go stronger. I believe it's possible to, I believe it's going to be difficult to get to the president's average 6% GDP growth in 4 years. They might hit 6% at one point, maybe towards the last 2 years. But for the first 2 years, I think it's going to be between 3 to 4%. But 6% is going to be very difficult, given the way we have started, because the GDP is largely driven by consumption, expenditure, and private investment. Until those two kick in, you're not going to see any strong GDP growth rates. I expect government to struggle in terms of getting enough revenue to conduct its affairs, and whatever revenue that government is going to get, they're going to have to supplement it with a lot of public debt. The fact that there's a bit more space for public debt now that subsidy has been removed. Again, if they reintroduce subsidy, even if it's temporary, again, that affects as well the revenue available to government for spending on the economy. I don't expect, like I said, a lot of the initial boosts that happened once the subsidy was removed, when the attempt to unify the effects is beginning to dissipate. You're seeing that people are now becoming, the cautious optimism is slowing down, and people are becoming a lot less enthusiastic. People are beginning to complain. People are beginning to be more skeptical and negative and pessimistic about the immediate prospects of the Nigerian economy. You have seen that the pace of reform has slowed down. In fact, some of it seems to be reversed. Initially, we were talking of unifying the rates between the CBN and the parallel. Now CBN says, well, they were never targeting parallel. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are changing, and it's creating more uncertainty in the economy and creating more challenges. So, and the longer the uncertainty remains, the bigger the challenges for the Nigerian economy. So again, in the short to medium term, maybe even the long term, I don't expect to see much or any significant developments. This just shows, this page just summarizes everything I've said. My expectation for slow, fragile GDP growth, expected high inflation rates to continue at least up to 2014 when base effects kick in. The fact that consumers are facing a huge, and that's the funny thing about the MBS numbers, because in one report I wrote after that, I said, well, if the rates of inflation as stated by MBA is so marginal, then why are we making all this noise about palliatives? Basically suggests that there's nothing going on that requires any, there's no panic, no need for panic. And again, that's another reason why it's a bit, those published numbers are a bit surprising. Rising debt, the need for social interventions and things of that nature. But again, I'm very concerned about those inflation numbers, because the objective of data is to inform government. It shows that even government is not paying attention to the numbers coming out, because if they did, then there's no panic. There are many times in the past that inflation rates went higher than that without any subsidy removal. So why is this different? Why are we having three-day working weeks? Why are we doubling people's salaries? According to NBS, it has only gone up by about 2% in the last 2 months. So again, I think they have to check those numbers and their methodology and check that it's fully reflecting the reality in the market. Otherwise, it makes nonsense of everything that is going around the states, the palliative, the distributing rights, and all this money we are borrowing. The data suggests there's no reason to do that. So that's basically the summary in terms of the macroeconomic indicators. The president, in line with his inaugural speech, highlighted these 7 key things that came up. Removal of subsidy, he had introduced that. He's threatening to reverse that temporarily because of the continuous rise in fuel prices. We're hoping to see the temporary fix. By the way, that NNPC is only temporary. It can only give them about 2 or 3 months to fix everything, all the structures to keep it stable. If they don't do that, we're going to go back to the rate depreciating further. And people have to understand that 3 billion is not enough to hold the exchange rate constant. It can stop the decline only temporarily. And the idea is in those 1 or 2 months that you have some breathing space, you can now try and guarantee supply. Until you guarantee that FX supply, all you're going to do is just postpone the depreciation. If in 2 months you have not put the structure in place, it's going to continue depreciating. If it keeps depreciating, you're going to have issues with fuel prices and so on, unless you want to introduce subsidy. Unified exchange rate, again, that's going the wrong direction. We're now, CPL is now saying they're going to be intervening. Now it's gone from, it's now more or less, it's back to more or less a managed float. CPL will be intervening in the official market, trying to keep it constant. He has also tried to target multiple taxation by creating this committee. Again, we're not sure the powers of this committee is just to advise government. If it's just to advise government, then it's a case of would they follow the advice? Would they be able to? Would they have the willpower to go through with all the recommendations of the committee, assuming the recommendations of the committee are even in the best interest of the country in the first place? And again, to do this, you also need the buy-in of states. The federal government does not have sole control over issues of multiple taxation. The other things are still work in progress, but he has attempted anyway to start working on 3 of the 6 he mentioned. Key factors to look forward to for the rest of the year and early 2024. Here, the list of ministers the ministers have been sworn in. It's the largest number of ministers in Nigeria's history. That's a bit worrying because we're at the point where we're trying to generate revenue for government. And I've always said that rather than government trying to get revenue by squeezing consumers, by squeezing businesses, I think that they should actually reduce. My preferred palliative measure was to reduce taxes. Reduce taxes on households, VAT, reduce income tax, reduce taxes on businesses, so that you can put them back on the similar level of purchasing power without injecting extra cash into the economy. That's what I think is a better way. But government is always worried about loss of revenue. It's possible that you might actually generate more revenue by doing that, one. And secondly, you can, by doing that, you are stimulating consumption demand, so you are stimulating VAT, make it increase. You're also allowing companies to declare more profits. And in the process, again, you're getting more CIT. You are ensuring that people are not laying off staff and creating more unemployment, which reduces personal income tax and things like that. So I am someone that prefers tax reduction, temporary tax reduction, especially also because it's temporary, to fix a problem in the short term. You can always increase the tax later on a lot easier than just distributing cash all over the place. That is one-off, that most of it might not even get to the intended beneficiaries, and it's possible that it might fuel inflation. By increasing number of ministries and ministers, that's just increasing cost of governance rather than what I advise, which is to control cost of. If government is worried about the revenue loss from reducing taxes, I think there are lots of wasteful expenditure in government that you should pay more attention to, and that's the way to counter the potential reduction in income from tax cuts. But by increasing number of ministers that will come with 10, 20, 30 aides, I think you're just increasing the cost of governance. And I don't think that's what the economy needs at this particular point in time. We need to be lean and mean. The government is telling us to manage ourselves and control our expenditure, more efficient in our spending. And I think that the government has to show example by doing that first. And by doing this, I think they have moved in the wrong direction. CBN clarity in terms of CBN management of FX, I think is becoming unclear again, creating that atmosphere that happened in the last regime where things were just unclear. People had no faith or trust in what they were doing because rules keep changing, I think getting reversed. I think it's important. Clarity is extremely important. Otherwise, you allow speculators to take advantage of the market, and that's partly what has been happening. And of course, the rate will keep depreciating. The commencement of Dangote refinery. While I don't expect Dangote refinery to reduce the prices of PMS significantly, especially since his crude oil feedstock was supposed to come from NNPC, that is already having a reduced production per day. There's already a problem there. He might have to purchase the balance of his crude by importing it, and of course, he's going to have to buy it at whatever the official crude oil price is. So I don't expect any significant reduction in PMS price, but at least it will have guaranteed supply. And whether that supply is even needed now, considering that the demand for PMS, because of the subsidy removal and the impact on cost of production, has gone down significantly, remains to be seen. Concerns about how they're going to sustain the attempt to reversed oil theft. It seems as if production is becoming a problem again. Oil companies are not investing in the oil industry any longer. Oil theft is still continuing, and of course, the usual breakdown in oil production activities still continue. That's probably what accounted for the reduction in July. It will be interesting to see what happens in August. And then all these ministers that have been set up, it's very important they hit the ground running, and let's see the direction of government. It's when we see clear direction of government that the international and domestic investors see are happy with, that they're going to start considering coming in. So they have to move very, very quickly, not just having speeches and creating panic or confusion, but being very clear, well articulated, and very direct in their policies, particularly regarding its fiscal and trade agenda. So I'm looking forward to what will come out of that in the next few months. I think I better end here. I've gone way off. I think I've done 30, 40 minutes. My apologies for doubling the amount allowed to speak. And I thank you once again for listening. I'm looking forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khale, for that very informative and interesting presentation. I must say that I'm better informed about the link between the global economy and the Nigerian economy and the challenges we also face as a nation. I personally took away some pointers on how to manage these challenging times and what we as a nation need to be more focused on. I will now yield to Ari for his presentation. Ari, we're all ears.
Thank you very much, Titi. It's been a very wonderful session so far. Special thanks to all our webinar audience. Thank you so much for your rapt attention. Also to Dr. Khale, thank you very much for an eye-opener. So what we talked in terms of recovery being in sight is not happening so soon. So I'll just go straight now to my own presentation within the brevity of the time that I actually have to just showcase what we'll just be talking about in line with markets. I believe a lot of you have been shared already, judging by Dr. Khale's presentation. So in terms of outline, pretty straightforward. Global capital market actually recapitulating right now. We've seen a lot of upheaval happening right now in the emerging market, from Argentina to Ecuador, also to Nigeria as well. Key rates, MPR rates that you mentioned right now also, inflation and the NGX all-share index return as at 2023. Fixed income, looking at how we've been able to actually manage RSA funds in terms of fixed income allocation, local equities market, and also the big elephant in the room in the past few weeks, looking at the CPL FX reserve, as well as the fallout of unifying exchange rate by the central bank, the official and the unofficial. We've seen corporates also declaring a lot of FX losses. What does that actually translate to individual investor? And looking at the pension industry, we'll do a snapshot as well as how we've been able to diversify RSA allocation across all the 6 RSA funds, as well as our plea to also RSA holders to try and also explore additional voluntary contributions and the reason behind it. In terms of actually looking at where inflation is, and again, looking at exposure to some foreign currency, we're looking at GDRs and also Eurobond. So we'll just basically showcase that to you so that you won't actually have to worry so much about that. In terms of what has happened, this has been said a lot earlier by the first speaker. We've seen global inflation also risen so much last year and also Q1 this year, but we've seen a bit of tepid in terms of rising inflation. And we see also that by next year, we should expect inflation figures globally to actually be at 4.3%. In most economies, as rightly mentioned, the cost of living crisis actually has risen by virtue of the increase in crude oil prices, as well as the war in Ukraine and Russia. For the Far East Asia, we've seen property market also slump in China. And we know how China is actually very, very important in the old world economy. All economies in the world actually, linked to China in one way or the other. I'll move on quickly here also. Looking at the emerging market, as I already said, in Argentina, we've seen an outsider actually won the primaries in Argentina. They also have a lot of crisis in terms of financial market. Ecuador also, we saw assassination of the presidential candidates. Even in Nigeria, we still don't have a substantive CBN governor. We still have an acting CBN governor. Current CBN governor is also having its own challenges in the law court. Looking at the risk, the truth be told, there's amount of risk to actually look at investing right now in the emerging market across the globe, not only in Nigeria. So we've seen earlier this year, we've seen dollar-denominated government bonds reaching a high of 5.8%. Now we've seen it at about 2.5%. So if you actually want more exposure to the emerging market, you need to also be careful about the risk. That's the honest truth about it. Looking at the key rates, we've mentioned this already in terms of inflation. We've seen the data from Bureau of Statistics saying that 24.08%. Also looking at the all share index, we've seen it risen as at 24.40. And the NPR, CPL also tries to jack up the NPR rate. And I think next month also we will have the MPC meeting, and it's likely also they might still jack up, interest rate as well to try and taper down on the rising inflation. This actually is a pictorial chart looking at the market in fixed income securities and seeing the chart that shows elevated yield. As we move on towards the end of the year, this might actually still go up a bit further. But the last auction, we started seeing stop rate as high as 15%, and we expect to actually go further higher. This actually showcased the equities index, which actually reached a new high this year. And a lot of it also, we've seen a lot of investors also taking profits. And we've seen this also nosedive. So as at H1 2023, we've seen a return of 18.96 compared to last year of 19.98%. This is actually the big elephant in the room. We've seen a lot of headlines in the papers about CBN also. What we used to have as our FX reserve, is it true or is not true? People are lower than $33 billion. Based on the data that was actually published by the CBN, we've seen that they also have some FX contract, which is justifiable by virtue of what's also selling crude oil and also getting some FX earnings. So they've done about $14.5 billion. When you adjust for this figure, you have about 19.45. However, JP Morgan still mentioned that theirs is actually about, looking at their own arithmetic, is about $3 billion net. Well, the jury still has a Dangote Sugar, Nigerian to an investor. Basically, it means that before this guy is actually paid dividend this year, this is actually trying to an investor. Basically, it means that before this guy is actually paid dividend this year. Okay, so sorry, there was a break there whereby I actually lost some of my communication. So in terms of foreign exchange reserve, we've actually seen a net this year was 19.45 billion, 19.45 actually being as a result of the FX swap being carried out by CBN. And on the next slide, I was actually going to showcase corporate FX losses by various multinationals. We've seen MTN, Nestle, Dangote Cement, Dangote Sugar, Nigerian Breweries, Guinness, and also IBL, all reporting enormous FX losses in Naira. So this actually brings us to our own sub-industry, the pension industry. What we've been able to do, looking at the PENCOM's regulation, we are the multi-asset allocation, and as well, we just showcase an industry snapshot. Basically, as at December 2022, we've seen 9.8 million RSA holders being actually registered, AUM 15 trillion there, and also in terms of pension to GDP, is as at 7.39% as at Q4 2021. In the last 5 years, we've seen a appreciable growth in AUM growth by about 242%, and as well as we've seen a low pension penetration rate about 14%. And that's why later on we'll be discussing more about micro pension and the need for also to have more informal sector operators being engaged with the micro pension scheme. In the industry right now, we have 29 pension operators looking at the custodian, the PFA, and also the closed PFA. So this actually shows the multi-asset allocation and how we as CPL are actually trying to basically ensure we are well diversified in this current dispensation, looking at the rising inflation. Fund one is exactly the aggressive fund, and it has a major exposure to equities. And the good thing about it also is that we can also do GDR, about also totally about 30%. For variable income, we have FGS securities, 60% in that, state government securities, 10%, and corporate debt securities, 35%. I mentioned here just now about the Fund 5, which is actually the micro pension scheme. So we implore all RSA holders that are already doing one RSA or the other, but you also have artisans, right, that are actually not planning for their retirement, to also try to actually buy into this particular product, which is a micro pension, and ensure also we have lots of holders also partaking in this benefit. Yeah, in terms of allocation, we have FGN securities in that 60%, and also we have ordinary shares of about 5%. And for the people that are actually more, based on their faith and looking at maybe by way of you don't want to do anything actually interest seeking, there's something called Fund 6, which is actually more of the ethical fund for mortgage aggressive. That's looking at non-interest money and capital market product exposure. And in that, we have about 70% in Sukuk, 15% state government Sukuk, corporate debt 40%, and also ordinary shares of about 25%. And for the balance fund, which is actually the Fund 2, which is the default RSA fund, that's actually for 49 years of age and below. We also have 70% of that also being invested in FGS securities, and as well as 25% in ordinary shares. I'm very happy to report that we are leading in this particular category of Fund 2 across the industry. And we have the people in active service, but actually 50 years and above, who actually are in Fund 3, and as well as people who are actually in Fund 4, who are 50 years and above and are retirees. So in terms of allocation, you can see it on the slide. This slide also will be posted on our website. Let's just move on. Looking at the return, right, from inception to date, I'm happy to actually share this, what CPL has been able to do in the industry. From inception, this is actually the default RSA fund. We've managed to actually generate return of over 650%, looking at Fund 2 alone. And this is actually the highest in the entire industry. The average for the industry is 419.07%. And I'm happy to report that your true PFA CPL has done over 659% return from inception to date. This particular fund is the biggest fund out of all the 6 funds actually showcased. This is a default fund, and we're happy to report that we're number 1 in the whole industry. How are we going to do that? By way of ensuring well-diversified portfolio. One thing I want to actually also mention is the need to also do something called AVC, additional voluntary contribution, right? It's based on you as an employee to actually set some money aside for the future. It may be towards your mortgage, it may be towards your children's school fees or a dream vacation. And the beauty of it is that this particular saving is actually tax exempt. So you stand the benefit of actually having appreciable return on this particular investment outlet. So I implore you all, if you're only on RSA with CPL, try also to actually ensure you buy into CPL's AVC. And that brings us to our very last slide. We've seen what Mr. Khale actually mentioned about inflation rising in Nigeria and also the risk of FX depreciation. So what actually happens to a common RSA holders? So what we're trying to do in CPL also is to also diversify our portfolio across various assets. So we're looking at GDR. So there are two local banks in Nigeria right now that also have GDR listed on the London Stock Exchange. So that's actually an avenue to also try to basically weigh against inflation. And also Eurobonds. We've seen Access, First Bank, UBA, EcoBank, Fidelity Bank, and Bank of Industry also issuing Eurobonds, both in US dollars and also in euros. So we believe also with this proper asset allocation, we're diversifying away from the risk that actually meets in the eyes of inflation in Nigeria and also of Naira depreciation. So that brings me to the end of our presentation. I want to thank you all for your attention, and we'll be available shortly now for the Q&A. Over to you, Titi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ari, for that presentation. It is refreshing to note that Crusader Sterling Pensions is able to make diversified investments, such as investing in G bonds that help hedge against persistent depreciation of the Naira and its resulting inflationary effects. This, of course, would help build wealth for our contributors. I have also learned how making additional voluntary contributions with all the tax efficient advantages they confer can mitigate the harmful effects of high inflation rates on our personal savings. And so now we go to the Q&A session. Just to say that a lot of questions have been asked, and our team has been working tirelessly to answer some of those questions. Like I said earlier, we may not be able to take all the questions during this session. We will take some. Some have already been answered. Some questions, we've seen that some questions have been dropped in the Google form as well. So we will be responding to people's personal email addresses with those questions. So I have a first question here from Matthew. Matthew is asking, how does the depletion of our foreign reserve affect the average contributor or the man on the streets? Ari, would you like to start with that question?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. The truth of the body is that the reserve is a tool to build investors' confidence. Just like, for instance, if you want to go to a bank, right, to actually go and request for a loan, the bank will ask you, what asset do you have in terms of comprising your obligation? So the reserve for any economy is actually a tool that boosts confidence for foreign investors and also for lenders. If Nigeria actually wants to actually borrow, right, in any currency aside Naira, which is actually a foreign currency, people will always want to check how much does this country have in terms of foreign reserve. So it's actually more of a booster for any economy as a more of confidence level to gauge the ability to actually pay back in terms of loan obligation, and also looking at what the country also has for future earnings. Thank you very much, Titi.
Thank you, Ari. Still on the issue of foreign reserves, I would love Dr. Khale's take. So Lee Kuan Yew, popularly known as the father of Singapore, was of the opinion that foreign reserves should be kept secret as they are the economic defense of any country. Dr. Khale, do you think the CBN could have been more discreet in terms of transactions between themselves, JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs, given that this is the first time the CBN's audited accounts have been released to the public since 2017?
Like the MD said, foreign reserves are the defense for the economy. And as much as possible, you have to be very careful with without telling lies, with negative information that you make to the public, because it will be used against you. Right? But in Nigeria, where we have already been publishing foreign reserves, I think it's and given the very suspicious atmosphere like the Nigerian economy operates, I think after publishing foreign reserves for so many years, any attempt to suddenly not publish them would create a problem. I think if we're going to do that, we have done that from the start. If you have been publishing something for many years and you suddenly choose not to, you're going to allow people to speculate. And when you have an environment of high risk, when things are not very, very clear, people are suspicious of you, it's not a good idea to do this. The JP Morgan, that information about JP Morgan in particular did not have to come out. That was really hard. There was way too much information that really did not need to be made public. But in terms of should we just hide the foreign reserves, I am not sure that it was possible. If we could have done that much earlier, yes, but I don't think it was something that was possible to do at this point. I think it would have made things a lot worse. So I don't think it's possible to do that. But yes, the JP Morgan information did not necessarily have to come out. We have just left it as the official gross reserves that we see. We didn't have to add that additional information, which has created more problems, because it just tells speculators how well we can fight back. Nevertheless, even if we try and hide that information, it's really easy for investors to know whether you can defend the Naira or not, because if they are saying that your obligations, you can't meet your dollar demand obligation, then it's obvious that you don't have the reserves. So I don't actually have to know what your reserves are. If I try and apply for $1 million and CBN cannot meet that demand, is struggling to meet that demand, if I go to the bank and I want to borrow dollars or even withdraw my own dollars in my DOM account and the bank doesn't have the money, I don't actually need official CBN reserves to know that they can't meet up with those reserves, because if they could, they would have meeting up. So if you have a situation where you had $800 million only, airlines are struggling to get their money, that will be made public, and that's a sign that the central bank just cannot afford it. So even without seeing those numbers, you will know that speculators, investors will know that there's a problem. If it takes me 6 months to a year to get my proceeds in dollars from the system, I will know that there's a problem within that demand. So again, I'm not sure at this point, I'm not sure the level of benefit is to have to start hiding the reserves.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khale, for that response. Looking at the other questions we have. Okay, so Damola is asking, Ari, how has the PFA been able to beat or cope with inflation in terms of return on investment on pension funds?
Great question. The truth about it is that it's a tough one, but with a well-diversified portfolio, as I actually showcased, looking at all the asset classes, you can actually work towards beating inflation, but it's not something that comes so cheap. So there's need to also have some exposure.
Okay, I think we have a bit of a challenge there, but let me quickly ask Dr. Khale regarding inflation. So Dr. Khale, we read that inflation is maybe on a 2-decade high, which implies that we have had periods of high inflation similar to this in the past. Are there any similarities between what we are facing now and such high inflation eras in the past? And are there any lessons in how they were managed that can help with what we are currently facing now?
Okay, I think when people say that there's been a 2-decade high, it's not because before those 2 decades, inflation has not been higher. I think that's referring to the period that the MBS can authoritatively cover inflation. So based from the time period when MBS's inflation adjustments and methodology changed, that's what they're referring to, and it just happens to be about two decades before. So inflation probably was higher before, it was less before, but we don't really have that authoritative data to back it, especially since methodologies have changed in between that period and they're not comparable. But yes, high inflation has always been, for many years, has been a problem in Nigeria in the last 2 decades, definitely. And the way you solve inflation is, first of all, you have to understand what's causing inflation. Inflation can be caused by 2 things, as we know, by too much cash in the system overheated, or by cost of production issues. So you are supposed to tackle inflation, and that's the way it was done before. There was a proper assessment of the cost of inflation in the economy. If it was excess money supply, that excess money supply was removed from the system and it worked. If it was cost of production because of distribution, transportation issues, and bottlenecks, then you resolve that. And I think the inflation we're having now was largely as a result of supply disruptions. People not being able to go to their farms, which is affecting output. People not, even when the output is produced, they are not able to move the the products across the country because of higher diesel or petrol prices or because of security. If you want to tackle inflation, you can tackle it by tackling the things that are causing the rise in cost of production, or reducing something else. If you cannot tackle those things, those costs immediately, reducing something else that just keeps the price constant. So if I am facing higher cost of moving my goods around because of higher petrol, you might reduce my cost of something else. So at the end of the day, my overall cost comes down. I don't have the incentive to pass any price to pass the increase in price to anybody, because my overall cost of production is the same. Because one item went up, but you were able to, government was able to introduce some policy to reduce some other item in my overall cost structure, and that will keep prices down in terms of costs. If it's things like security, just try and make the system more secure. So I think we have a lot of, I think at this point we're having both. We're having higher cost of production, we're having distribution, infrastructure related challenges, and then we're also having excess money being pumped into the economy. So I think that's the way it was reduced in the past. Excess money was removed, and the structural challenges, disruptions we're having today, we really did not have them. The security challenges we had then, we really did not have them at those times. So it was easier to control inflation. Now the problem is more complex and it requires several different fixes, many of which cannot be done in the short to medium term.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khale, for that response. So we're now going to go back to Are. The last question he was answering, which was asked by Damola: how has the PFA been able to beat or cope with inflation in terms of return on investments on pension funds?
Thank you very much, Titi. As I was saying before I was actually cut off, it's actually a tough call, but it's not impossible. With a well-diversified portfolio, looking at various asset classes and also some exposure into foreign currency, you can actually do a bit better than inflation. So if you look at our fund two, since inception, we've done over 650% in terms of return. I believe even with inflation, the real return should actually still be positive. So it's actually not impossible, but it's something that with right exposure and proper timing, and also ensuring you select careful asset with strong fundamental, you can actually do much better vis-a-vis inflation. Thank you very much.
Still on RA, Aloha is asking, how are we sure our monies are safe with PFAs? A friend told me how his pension balance dropped recently.
Yeah, I mean, one thing about it is this, right? With the way pension asset is being ring-fenced, right? We have a custodian, right? We are just, as a PFA, we're more like fund managers. So the asset itself sits with the custodian. And we have, in CPL, for instance, we have first pension custodian who actually is our own custodian. So in terms of having a drop in an RSA balance, maybe in terms of gains or losses, that may actually happen based on market cyclical pattern. It's not impossible. We're in this particular game for the long haul. It's not a short-term investment. So a lot should actually be assured that is all for the long haul. And with the right PFA, we'll surely ride the curve and enjoy superior returns. Thank you very much, Titi.
So thank you very much, Are. Our time is fast spent, but we have just one more question that we'll take for Dr. Khale. We hear that experts say the fundamental problem is low productivity of Nigerians and the Nigerian economy. If you could pick one thing to immediately boost productivity, what would you, Dr. Khale, focus on?
Well, first of all, I'm not entirely certain that the main or only challenge for, with Nigeria is just boosting productivity. I think it's several that, low productivity is also part of it. But to answer your question directly, I mean, to pick one of several issues, from investing in infrastructure, access to finance, maybe research and development, improving governance. There are many improving governance, transparency, technology adoption, maybe improving supply chains, cost of production, and things like that. I would say if I was to pick one, and the only one that could be handled, I would have said education and skills development. Now, I'm not talking of going to school, I'm talking of actual education, which is not the same as schooling. And because I think that is no matter if you fix everything else and your labor force is still poorly educated and cannot meet is out of touch with the realities of the needs of the economy, both the domestic economy and the global economy, then all your efforts in improving everything else is going to waste. It's education that is the bedrock of everything. So I think we have to pay a lot of attention to improving the education sector in skills development. I think it's very vital for increasing productivity. I think there's a need for the country to prioritize quality education, vocational training programs, and more importantly, these things was aligned with the needs of the global and domestic job market. A lot of things are changing, but a lot of things, like I said, are schooling, that people are just teaching things that are outdated and not really relevant to this particular market. And that's one of the reasons why Nigeria continues to have this low productivity, because the manpower have very little skills, they're not properly educated, and they cannot really connect with the changing dynamics in the global and domestic world. So I would say educational skill development is the one thing I will highlight if I had my way.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khale. I will now invite our ever-dependable FD, the Executive Director of Business Development, for a summary of the key takeaways.
Okay, thank you, Titi, for the moderation so far. It's been quite engaging. It's always a pleasure to engage our customers and associates. And I would also like to thank our guest speaker, Dr. Yemi Khale, for that wonderful presentation. We appreciate your presence, everybody's presence. Thank you very much. We are always very intentional at Crusaders Sterling Pensions when it comes to our customers. And one of our core values is our devotion to our customers. We don't take it lightly. So thank you very much. I noted some insights, okay, from the two speakers on how to navigate, our economic landscape, macroeconomic challenges. But I only mentioned two because our time is fast spent, and a lot of our customers have been here. Thank you very much for that. Number one, inflation is moving faster than investment returns. That's the major concerns. The major concern across the topic of today. And you can only beat that trend, okay, if you place your funds in the hands of a strong investment manager, a strong professional like Crusaders Sterling Pensions. And that was obvious in my MD's presentation. He showcased our fund price. We've been leading the industry for the past 15 years. Okay, so you want your money safe, which a lot of questions have revolved around. Okay, choose wisely where you place your fund. Dr. Khale also talked a lot about Nigeria's over dependence on oil. It's been a concern. It's been a topic for many decades. It makes us very vulnerable to many economic factors, including external ones. I know he talked about OPEC, okay, cutting down our production volume further down. That's a major concern because we are really dependent on oil. Unfortunately, I recall you also said that many non-oil sectors are also dependent on the oil sector. So that's a double concern. And he made some recommendations to the government on how we can tackle this. He singled out Angola on how they've been able to overcome that challenge, acting at the right time against inflation. So it's been enriching. Thank you very much, everybody. I can't wait for the next webinar. And from my team, they're already putting together another one before the end of the year. Thank you very much, guys. Nice seeing you again. Hope to see you again. Bye. Titi.
Thank you very much, FD. It has been an absolute pleasure sharing this time with you all. Again, we thank all our speakers for sharing from their wealth of knowledge and for their valuable time. Thank you, Dr. Khale. Thank you very much, Mr. Rotimi Adebi. As Albert Einstein once said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We hope that this session, as intended, has given us a fresh perspective on how we can navigate and course correct where necessary. Remember, the conversation does not end here. Please follow us on all our social media platforms displayed on the screen and engage with us. We would love to hear from you. If we didn't get to your question today, we assure you that we will reach out to you with the response. This webinar will also remain up on our YouTube channel, and we will send you the link for those who asked.
Apologies.
Thank you all for being here today. And until next time, from all of us at Crusader Sterling Pensions, have a beautiful day ahead. Bye-bye.
Is on my side. You'll be there through the stormy weather. Say that pension is by my side. And I'm young, we are forever. And we litty together. When I need a friend, say that pension on my side. Be the real MVP. Forever we can fly. You say that's passion, yeah. Be the real MVP. Be the real MVP. Forever we can fly. You say that passion, yeah. Be the real MVP. Be the real MVP. Forever we can fly. You say that passion, yeah. On my mind, live a life of value. Forever lead, you know that together we can fly. We can fly. Live a life of value. Forever lead, you know that together we can fly. We can fly. Now I'm young, but when I'm older, you say that pension is on my side. You'll be there through the stormy weather. Say that pension is by my side. And I'm young, we are forever. And we litty together. When I need a friend, say that pension is on my side. Be the real MVP. Forever we can fly. You say that's passion, yeah. Be the real MVP. Be the real MVP. Forever we can fly. You say that passion, yeah. Be the real MVP. You say that's passion, yeah. Be the real MVP. You say this passion, yeah. Never have to walk alone with Crusader Sterling Pensions. And you know that you never have to walk alone with Crusaders. Sterling Pensions, yeah. Be the real MVP.
Creating wealth for retirement. Crusader Sterling Pensions, a member of the Custodian Investment PLC Group.